Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to hop right in. We've got a session, a panel, then another session and lunch, and we're going to jump straight into our next talk. I'd like to welcome Sabrina McGuigan. Sabrina is the Director of Franchise Operations. She's in the rare disease space at Sanofi. Sabrina's got a wonderful talk focused around breaking the fourth wall in rare disease. Obviously, rare disease, different concept to the traditional HCP omni-channel marketer. But Sabrina's got a wealth of experience in healthcare in general. She's very passionate about what she does, and she's got a very interesting background to share beyond that. So a couple of random facts about Sabrina. She's, I believe, she's visited 40 countries so far, so she's an avid traveler. She did a skydive to raise $50,000 for an orphanage in Cambodia, and I think that was her first and last skydive from what I gather. But so she's clearly not afraid of heights, but wary of the outcome. Yeah, she's going to be joining us this morning to give a wonderful talk about some of the work and the concepts that she's done in the augmented reality space, and we'll go from there. So please join me in welcoming Sabrina as our next speaker this morning.
Oop, Jesus. Thank you, Simon. So, surprise fact, I will not be talking about AI. So thank you for coming back from the break. 90%. That's the approximate percentage of people living with alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency who remain undiagnosed. Not untreated, not undertreated, but undiagnosed. So let's think about that for a moment. We have an inherited genetic condition that silently damages the liver and subsequently the lungs over time, a condition that can lead to emphysema in non-smokers, liver cirrhosis in young adults, progressive irreversible decline. And yet 9 out of 10 people don't know they have it. Now let's zoom out. Across rare disease broadly, the pattern doesn't improve, it actually compounds. More than 300 million people globally are estimated to be living with a rare disease. In the United States alone, that's approximately 30 million people, so 1 in 10. So if you look around this room, there's a high chance that someone is sitting in here with a rare disease they don't know about. Which means that rarity is not about the patient, it's about the physician's exposure. And most clinicians only ever encounter a handful of rare diseases over a course of a career. And that creates a structural problem in medicine, because diagnosis is not just about knowledge, it's about pattern recognition under uncertainty. So today I want to talk about why that matters, and I also want to talk about what we can do as marketers to help shift that. Not through more data, not through more publications, but through experience, and ultimately through ways of seeing, because today I want to talk about what that means to break the fourth wall in healthcare. In theater and movies, the fourth wall is that invisible barrier between the audience and the actors. So the actors live inside the story, the audience watches the story, and they usually don't intervene, they remain separate. Except for sometimes. We've seen this happen in movies like Deadpool and Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where they talk to the audience. Healthcare has its own fourth wall. Clinicians learn diseases, patients live them. And between those two realities exists a gap that no slide deck, no guideline, and no textbook actually closes. That's where understanding can get lost. For most of my career, I assumed that if we had better information or more information, more CME, we could close that gap. But information doesn't guarantee recognition, and recognition is what drives diagnosis. So the question becomes, what actually creates recognition in the human brain? And the answer, increasingly, is experience. And I only learned this when life gave me a reason to question everything that I knew. For several years, I've participated in Cycle for Survival. And if you've ever experienced it, I want you to imagine hundreds of people in a room. At Equinox, I usually participate in New York City. It's not a passive audience. Everyone's moving together, collectively, riding for hours to raise funds for rare cancer research, for Memorial Sloan Kettering. There's survivors, there's caregivers, there's researchers, families, all moving together. And every year I ride for people I know and people I'll never meet. Both my parents are cancer survivors, so that kind of shapes how I show up in this room. And in 2023, after I sent my annual fundraising email, I got a familiar envelope in the mail, handwritten. And I knew exactly who it was from before I even opened it. It was my Aunt Mary, who's my godmother. She never used email or technology for her donations. She believed someone was going to steal her information, so she always sent a check. And she always sent a letter, the kind of letter that instantly feels like home. And in it, she told us about the neighbor's recent antics, my Uncle Buddy and his gardening adventures, and of course, her dog, Lola. And she also kind of mentioned that she was kind of feeling off, that she might go to the doctor. Nothing structured like a symptom list, just the way we all talk when we're not feeling quite well. I'm a little tired, not quite feeling myself. Maybe I'll go get that checked out. And she signed the letter, "Stay safe and cool and never change. You remind me of someone, me. Love you, Aunt Mary." That was the last letter I'd ever received from her. Unfortunately, when I got the panicked call from my cousin, she was already deteriorating in a hospital bed with rapidly progressing, unexplainable symptoms. And despite multiple specialist consultations, repeated testing, and clinical escalation, nothing was changing. I called in multiple favors of clinicians I knew in the city, and no one could make a decision or make an impact fast enough. Unfortunately, she died of a rare immunological condition, one that we don't fully quite understand ourselves. And at her graveside, a single question stayed with me. Was this preventable? Could one doctor have seen a pattern or seen a symptom that would have changed the trajectory? Could awareness, real awareness, have arrived sooner? After she died, I found myself replaying everything. Not as regret, but as reconstruction. And that's what humans do when they experience uncertainty and loss. It's a fundamental part of grief. We replay everything. We look for a signal in the noise. We reassemble all the timelines. We look for the moment where the system deviated. And what I've realized over time is this: rare disease rarely announces itself. It disguises itself. It borrows symptoms from conditions that are more commonly known: fatigue, shortness of breath, GI issues, anxiety, depression. And the most common clinical presentations are often the least specific, which means the brain defaults to probability, not possibility. And probability always favors the familiar. Doctors are taught to look for horses when they look for hoofbeats, in medicine, not zebras. And rare disease is dependent on zebras. As I began speaking with patients across multiple rare disease communities, a pattern emerged. And it wasn't just a diagnostic delay, it was a diagnostic invisibility. Many patients reported multiple misdiagnoses and normalized dismissal of symptoms. And the most consistent finding wasn't clinical, it was actually emotional. Patients didn't just describe being undiagnosed, they described not being believed. And I'm sure all of us have sat in a doctor appointment at one point with either ourselves or a loved one where we explained symptoms and we got a weird look from the clinician where we felt a sense of judgment. That's a different category of harm. And because that erodes trust in the system before it even affects the body. To understand why that persists, we need scale. Rare disease is actually not rare. And I know you must be thinking, what is she saying? It's in the name, rare disease. But it's not rare because it's fragmented. Collectively, there's over 10,000 distinct rare diseases that we know about. There's many more we haven't even discovered. About 80% of those are genetic in condition, in origin, and many, while they manifest in childhood, don't present until adulthood. Yet most clinicians, they operate with a clinical exposure bias. They're trained on common diseases they'll most likely see. They're looking for horses, not zebras, remember? So it's not their fault. It's a necessity of medical training, but it creates a structural gap. Exposure does not match prevalence, and that gap becomes the diagnostic delay. And studies consistently show that rare disease patients often wait 4 to 5 years for a diagnosis, with some conditions lasting 7 to 10 years. and many undergo unnecessary procedures before correct identification while seeing between 4 and 7 clinicians. And every year of delay matters because rare disease is often progressive. Delay equals irreversible change, neurodegeneration, fibrosis, organ failure, loss of function that cannot be regained once it's lost. So the problem is not medical, it's time-based. We're diagnosing too late in the disease trajectory. And this is where we can come in. This is where healthcare, marketing, and education need to intersect, because awareness is not information distribution, awareness is cognitive activation. It's because it's the moment the clinician thinks, I've seen this before, and connects the dots. It's not because they memorized it, it's because they experienced it. Most medical communication assumes this linear projection. Often we've created a slide deck or some sort of piece. It's got our messaging on it. We hope it has some sort of retention with the clinician, and that if we repeat it enough, there'll be retention, and that it will shift in its behavior change. But retention alone doesn't produce recognition. Recognition requires contextual encoding. The brain does not store isolated data points as facts. It stores experiences as networks. There needs to be sensory input, spatial context, emotional salience, narrative structure, which means the most effective medical education is not informational, it's experiential. To understand why this gap persists, we need to honestly look at how clinical decisions are usually made. There's this assumption that medical and medicine is described as this linear process. A doctor sees a patient with symptoms, they make a differential diagnosis, they do testing based on that differential diagnosis, and they hope to confirm their hypothesis. But in reality, clinicians are operating in an environment of probability under severe time constraints. And research has shown in clinical cognition that diagnostic decisions are usually made in under 2 minutes of a patient presenting. And that's not because they're careless, it's because they're trying to pattern match under cognitive load. And we know with the changes in healthcare, they have to see more patients in a smaller amount of time. So we have to help them make it easier. There was a 2023 analysis of patient visits that found that physicians often interrupt their patients within the first 11 to 23 seconds of an initial encounter. What do you learn in 11 to 23 seconds? But they're pattern matching underneath this time constraint. And those initial encounters unfortunately cause the patient to be categorized into the wrong bucket. And categorization is everything, because once you're miscategorized, your diagnostic pathway narrows. And this cognitive science is known as premature closure. And rare disease is very vulnerable to it, because rare disease doesn't fail in the lack of information, it fails early categorization in the wrong bucket. Clinician might diagnose a patient with COPD when they really have alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. All they need to do is run the serum AAT. It's in the GOLD guidelines. Only 6 to 9% of pulmonologists do it. Clinician might think that they have an alcoholic at hand when they really have a MASH patient. They never do the further diagnostics. They just make assumptions. And they might think their patient just has anxiety when they really have an endocrine dysfunction. A lot of things get mismatched. And once that initial label is applied, the system tends to self-confirm. And testing follows the label, not the truth. So there's less discussed dimension as well, and that's cost. And that is a big tax on a society, because rare disease misdiagnosis is not only clinically harmful, it's expensive. Studies across the health systems have shown that patients with rare diseases can incur 2 to 3 times higher healthcare costs prior to the appropriate diagnosis, because they're filled with unnecessary specialist visits, imaging, procedures. There's emergency department utilization to try to control symptoms. And there's also productivity costs that are assigned when patients and their caregivers can't go to work and they can't contribute to society. In the United States alone, that's hundreds of millions of dollars, almost $1 trillion, hundreds of billions, sorry. But the deeper efficiency is not financial, it's time-based. We're spending years optimizing around the wrong diagnosis, which means that every intervention is slightly misaligned and the system quietly absorbs. And this concept is not abstract for me. I know I myself lived for almost 2 decades with undiagnosed endometriosis, 25 years not knowing. That's a life phase, not a delay. And it took a second opinion for a cancer scare at Memorial Sloan Kettering to actually get that diagnosis. And what that provided for me was retrospective clarity, because it wasn't that it was a delay in a diagnosis. It was realizing that all the signals were present, but they were never integrated. And integration requires recognition. And recognition requires prior exposure, which in rare disease, a lot of clinicians don't get. So I began asking the different question. What if clinicians could experience that disease before they actually encounter a patient? And what if they could just not memorize it, but walk inside of it? And that led my team to create this extended reality experience while I was at Takeda, for alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. Extended reality is sort of this broad umbrella that encompasses several types of realities, like virtual, augmented, mixed. But what it does is it kind of makes abstract systems into spatial embodied, experiences. So the person can actually walk inside the disease, walk inside the patient body. It allows them to see the emotions of the patient, the experience that they're living in, as well as how does the disease actually work at the cellular level. And alpha-1's a great disease to kind of do this with, because it's one of the most common genetic diseases. It's often misdiagnosed as asthma or COPD, and it's only identified usually after severe organ failure. And 90% are misdiagnosed. So how do we change that number? The biology is elegant but invisible. And static information doesn't necessarily convey progression, so we asked, what if clinicians could see that cascade unfold? And so we built this immersive situation. We moved clinicians inside, we put the HoloLenses on them, we put them inside the body so they could see a 3D liver. We showed them how the genetic mutation happened on the long arm of chromosome 14 in the SERPINA1 gene, how that sort of translated into misfolding of the proteins, the alpha-1 antitrypsins in the liver, and how they aggregated together and couldn't pass through the endoplasmic reticulum, and that caused stages of fibrosis in the liver. And also the systemic effects, because alpha-1 antitrypsin actually neutralizes elastase, neutrophil elastase in the lungs, which prevents inflammation as well as infection. So that's why both systems are affected. And this wasn't just a visualization, it was a spatial cognition. The difference was profound because it changed the questions we were getting in the booth from clinicians. Instead of asking, what is it? They asked, how could I see it in a patient? Like, what am I looking for? How do I test for it? So the shift went from knowledge to recognition, and that is the entire diagnostic bottleneck. And we have growing evidence that supports that this immersive learning is now supporting healthcare education. Applications of these technologies significantly enhance various dimensions of learning objectives. They help effectively engage learners, increase their focus and motivation. They also help spatial understanding of anatomy and pathology. They improve clinical decision-making, confidence, increasing significantly. They help decrease skills acquisition by 30 to 60%. And they also have retention improvements approaching 75 to 80%. And you might wonder why, and that's because extended reality sort of aligns how memory is encoded. Let's talk a little bit about the brain. So the hippocampus is what drives short-term memory, but it does not prioritize bullet points. It prioritizes place, movement, association, repetition within context. So we remember experience, not what we're told. So no clinician can memorize 10,000 rare diseases. It's impossible. But when we put them through this experience, they start thinking things like, I've seen this pattern before in my patients. Or, this combination of symptoms doesn't quite fit. Maybe I should look at this again. Or something's off in this cluster. And diagnosis is often a failure of pattern activation, so the extended reality increases that probability that the pattern exists in the memory at all. And it creates a prior experience where none existed. When clinicians engaged with the modules, we observed additional shifts. When should I test for this? What am I missing in my COPD patients? Could this explain why other treatments that we've tried failed and my patients are getting worse? And this is where education becomes behavior change. And behavior change is the only metric that really matters in the work that we do. And I'm going to say that again because it's really important. We might have a list of metrics that we consider important, and they are, But behavior change is really the only important one, because behavior change transitions into the patient experience. However, it's also very important that as we create these immersive experiences, and we've heard from the patient perspective from someone today already, that patients aren't content and they aren't storytelling devices. They're co-authors. So as we're building them, we need to make sure that not only are they clinically accurate and emotionally responsible, but we should involve patients in designing them, because this is their story. It needs to be grounded in that lived experience for us to truly translate that to a memory for a clinician. Because empathy without accuracy becomes distortion, and distortion in medicine is dangerous. As we've heard a lot about AI today, you know that we're entering a convergence point in healthcare. Genomics is accelerating, AI is scaling pattern recognition, digital biomarkers are expanding, and precision medicine is fragmenting disease categories. But none of that matters if the clinician never considers the diagnosis. We can do all of this great work, but if it doesn't affect on the clinical level, it means nothing. A test only works if it's ordered, a therapy only works if the disease is recognized, which means the bottleneck is still human cognition, not data availability. And so if we think of extended reality not as a tool, but as a system layer, it becomes more interesting, because there's multiple layers to each clinician's life. They have healthcare records that give them documentation layer. They have clinical guidelines, which are the decision layer. And they have diagnostics, which complete the measurement layer. What they don't have is memory augmentation layer, which extended reality can help support. It has the potential of not replacing education, but reinforcing it. Not replacing experience, but simulating exposure at scale. In a world where no clinician can see every rare disease, we need systems that ensure that even one exposure might be enough to help future recognition. And that is in the design principle. So I still think about my Aunt Mary and her letter, not because of what we lost, but because now I feel like I better understand that rare disease is not just a medical challenge, it's a systems challenge. Could have recognition have arrived sooner? Could one have seen her a little differently? Sure. I will never know that, though. But I do know this, and if you need anything to motivate you through the rest of your day and the rest of your year while you're developing programs, it's this. Somewhere today, a patient is sitting in a doctor's office hoping that someone connects the dots. And a doctor is looking at all the points, trying to figure it out. And if we can change recognition, we change diagnosis. And if we can change diagnosis, we change everything that follows down the pathway. So this opportunity is not just to educate, it's to transform the patient experience, to make the invisible visible, to turn information into memory, and memory into action. So instead of telling rare disease stories from the inside out, we live them. We break that fourth wall, and we change what it means to recognize, which changes everything for patients. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sabrina there. Any questions? Yes, all right, here we go.
Before you have to walk across the room. That was very powerful. And it led me to wonder on one of the part of your problem statement, though, is the ability of patients to describe their symptoms. Do you see a pathway for this to actually do that, to help show patients different things so they find the right wordings to help with the pattern recognition early?
I think that's a great question. And I know that some of the work that we did, funnily enough, I'm working at Alpha One at Sanofi as well, is, in really bringing the patients into the experience and giving them opportunities to tell their stories so that we can hear what their lexicon is and better understand it. We had a patient, we showed that experience at the European Association for the Study of the Liver and also at the American Association for the Study of Liver Disease. And at the American conference, we had a patient come and tell his story. And it turns out that he was one of 6 that all had this condition, and he had lost his 5 siblings to it. He was the only one that survived. And what clinicians said after they listened to him talk and then did the experience was that they were able to kind of connect the emotional. And when you have an emotional experience, it creates a memory. Fun fact, emotional memory is the first thing as humans that we actually develop. So when you're very young, you might think like, oh, I remember when I fell off my bike. You don't remember when you fell off your bike before 7 years old, but you do remember how you felt. That's why we form relationships with people like our parents or our grandparents or aunt and uncle or our sister or brothers. But a long-term memory doesn't start till 7 or 8. But if we can learn a little bit more about how the patients are talking about it and put it in that context, then when the physician hears them in their office, they can also kind of connect the dots. Did that help?
Yeah, actually, I guess I was thinking about more.
Oh. Yeah,
Great presentation, by the way.
thanks.
My question is, I see a lot of what you're saying in different spaces I've been in. In oncology, for example, there's a lot of time a lack of biomarker testing when we know that it's very important. How do you kind of bridge the gap between that inertia you get from the HCP without offending them to tell them like, hey, do this thing that you kind of know you're supposed to do?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. And it's slightly different in oncology because a lot of times there's some sort of therapeutic and rare disease. Sometimes the inertia comes from, well, why do I want to diagnose it if I can't treat the patient? I think what we've tried to educate around and tried to encourage is that you don't want to wait for a treatment to find the patients. You know, there's a lot of work happening in oncology and rare disease across the board in immunology. We don't want to have to like find the patients when we have the treatment. We want to have them ready to go. And then there's also lifestyle modifications and family planning reasons that you want to know. Like in alpha-1, if both parents carry the gene, the chances of you having a child that has alpha-1 is exponential. So just educating around why there is a benefit to find that, all we can do is try to help move the needle and encourage. And I know in Alpha-1 we've had some really great advocates talk about the importance of disease awareness and education. And I think when you can get some of those clinical advocates, the clinicians that are actually boots on the ground to talk to their peers, that also helps.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you very much, Sabrina. Thank you. Right. Okay, so